That's why he's doing it. This is very, very deliberate on Jesus' part. He knows exactly what he's doing here. Now, let me finish the history though real quick. I got ahead of myself there. Because that wasn't the only exile that was important. In 587 BC, the remaining 2 tribes down in the south, Judah and Benjamin, were also taken in exile by the Babylonians. Okay? So the Babylonians came a couple hundred years later, and they tore down the temple, they burned Jerusalem to the ground, and they took the remaining 2 tribes into exile in Babylon. So in the 6th century before Christ, it pretty much looked like all of God's promises were totally broken, that he had failed his people, that the kingdom that he had said would last forever didn't even last for 500 or 600 years, and that everything was in ruins. Now, some light began to shine in the darkness. About 40 or 50 years after, around 537, 538 BC, the king of Persia allowed the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, to return from exile. He actually gave them money to rebuild the temple and to rebuild the city of Jerusalem. And so that exile came to an end. The Babylonian exile came to an end. But you know what exile never came to an end? It was the Assyrian exile. It was the northern kingdom. It was the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom remained scattered and lost among the Gentiles. And that's where the legend of the lost tribes of Israel, you may have heard about it, the 10 lost tribes of Israel. That's where that legend comes from. Because by the time you got down to Jesus' day in the 1st century AD, although the 2 tribes from the south had come back from exile, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom remained lost. They were scattered amongst the Gentiles. Their descendants had intermingled with the Gentiles. And who knows where they were? Who knows who they were? They were the lost tribes of Israel. And so with that in mind, when we go back to the gospel, what's so powerful about this is that the Assyrian exile of the 10 northern tribes, the lost tribes of Israel, where did it begin? It began in the territories of Zebulun and Naphtali. It began in Galilee. According to the book of Kings, 2 Kings chapter 15 to 17 says that the first tribes to go in exile were Zebulun and Naphtali. So when Jesus begins his public ministry, what does he do? He beelines it for Galilee and for Capernaum because he is going to begin undoing the exile of the 12 tribes by beginning his ministry precisely where the first exile started. He is going to begin gathering around himself the 12 disciples in order to build up a new Israel precisely where the old Israel was devastated, precisely where the old Israel was scattered to the 4 winds. So that's what Matthew means when he says, now with all that history in mind, listen to the words again. Leaving Nazareth, he went and dwelt in Capernaum by the sea in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali toward the sea, across the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who sat in darkness has seen a great light. Those who sat in the region of the shadow of death, light has dawned. And notice, if you have any doubts that that's what Jesus is doing, what does he begin to preach? Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Any first century Jew who would have heard the language of the kingdom would have always known that the kingdom meant all 12 tribes. The kingdom of David was all 12 tribes. The kingdom of Solomon was all 12 tribes. So if Jesus is coming proclaiming the kingdom, he means the restoration of Israel. He means the ingathering of the tribes. He doesn't just mean the salvation of the southern tribes, the Judah and Benjamin, the Jews. He means the ingathering of the lost tribes of Israel. And if you had any doubt that that's what he meant, look at the last part of the gospel text. What does he begin doing? Calling the first 4 of the 12 disciples. So any first century Jew, when they would have seen Jesus with 12 disciples around him, that he called the 12, as if they were, this unique appointed body of followers, would have recognized that he was making a messianic move, that he was talking about regathering the 12 tribes. But they also would have been able to tell him, that's a nice idea, but there's a problem. You know as well as I do that 10 of those 12 tribes have been scattered to the 4 winds. You know as well as I do that 10 of those 12 tribes are lost among the Gentiles. So how are you going to gather them all back? How are you going to reconstitute the kingdom of David? How are you going to bring about this kingdom? Well, as you'll see as we move through the gospel, the answer is real simple. If you want to get the lost tribes of Israel, you got to go get the Gentiles, because that's where they are, scattered among the nations, right? So what Jesus is going to do is he's going to begin with the Jews and then move out to the Gentiles and gather around himself a new Israel to fulfill the prophecies of the old covenant. And that's what the 12 disciples are all about. And you'll see this elsewhere in the Gospels. We haven't gotten there yet, but later on in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 19, verse 28, what does Jesus say to the apostles? Truly I say to you, in the new world, when the Son of Man shall sit on his glorious throne, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Now that's it right there. This is what he's doing at the very beginning of his public ministry. He's gathering the 12 around himself to symbolize that he's going to gather the 12 tribes. But notice something very important here. He says, in the new world. Notice, he's not talking about going find the lost descendants of the 10 tribes amongst the Gentiles and then putting them on buses or airplanes or something like that, or in boats, and bringing them back to the earthly promised land. He's talking about bringing them to the new promised land of the new creation, right? And of the kingdom, not of this world, but of the kingdom of heaven. Okay. Now we'll have to see how that plays out as we move through the course of the gospel. How is Jesus going to gather in the 12 tribes to this heavenly kingdom? We're not there yet, but I'll give you a hint. It has to do with the Last Supper and with the Eucharist, but I'll have to wait till we get to that later.